Last Handful of Clover, a novel by Wess Mongo Jolley, read by the author. Book 3, The Stone in the Stream. Chapter 8, Officer Grayson. June 16th, 6:22 a.m. The sun crested the peaks of the Wasatch, red and angry, behind a pall of greasy smoke. Its weak illumination crept slowly across the valley, revealing the dying city, the burned buildings, the downed power lines, the shattered windows, and the destroyed cars. It kindled a spark in the dull, gray eyes of the dead, scattered like autumn leaves on the silent sidewalks. It shone through gaps in curtains, revealing houses full of bodies, or houses full of the shattered, who peeked out with eyes wide or dull with despair. It sparkled brightly in pools of blood, fresh or drying. The sun banished the cool night air, but did nothing to dispel the sense of burning, decay, and terror. Carla Grayson had been dispatched to the streets just after midnight when it became clear that the Salt Lake City Police and Highway Patrol were now on their own. As the National Guard and Army pulled out of the city, the only authorities left to stem the violence were the ever-dwindling local forces. It had been over 5 years since she had last worn a uniform, and the one she had borrowed was ill-fitting. But as strange as it felt to be behind the wheel of a squad car again, Carla had accepted that it was necessary. Not all of her colleagues had done the same. The desertion rate in the SLPD was high, and getting higher each hour as more and more cops decided that they either needed to be home to protect their families or, sometimes, to simply protect themselves. Those who remained were left to confront a city gone mad. They were far too few and far too overwhelmed to really make a difference, but they persevered, going where the radio dispatchers sent them, or, more frequently as the night wore on toward morning, just cruising the dark and deserted neighborhoods and dealing with whatever nightmares they encountered. If nothing else, the thinking went, seeing a police cruiser going by would inspire some small measure of hope in those who remained alive. South Sandy was especially hard hit, and Carla couldn't even remember how she'd ended up here. The night had passed in a kind of adrenaline blur, starting just minutes after she'd left the police station. In her long career on the force, Carla had never shot anyone, but that ended when she took down a woman who was dressed in an Indian sari. The woman had been beating a man with a golf club in a Utah State liquor store parking lot, but the man had been dead for some time. Carla had yelled at the woman to put down the club, but instead of complying, she had just laughed and then charged, moving so fast that Carla barely had time to get her gun out of its holster. She'd put 2 bullets in the woman's leg and 1 in her abdomen, before she finally fell at Carla's feet, writhing and cursing. When Carla grasped the golf club, the woman had been laughing, even with 3 bullets in her. She was chattering in a thick British accent. "It's such bloody fun, sister, such fun," she'd cackled. But in the next moment, the woman's voice changed, and suddenly she was screaming in pain from her wounds. And when Carla had tried to talk to her, she realized that the woman actually didn't speak any English at all. She looked confused and in shock as she grasped at Carla's coat. It was terrifying, but it was brief. The woman didn't take long to die. Afterward, sitting alone on the sidewalk in the middle of the night, Carla decided she would do her best not to shoot another person on this terrible night. Whatever was happening to these people, they didn't know what they were doing. Whether it was madness brought on by a virus or by a chemical agent, there was no way these people could be held responsible for their actions. That resolve held through the night, although she had seen more death and destruction in those few hours than she had ever experienced, either as a beat cop or as a detective. She had fired her gun several more times to scare off looters and marauders, but so far she hadn't killed again. Her goal was to protect whoever was in danger and then get them to safe shelter. In the course of the night, she'd helped more than a dozen individuals and families to do just that. And especially for the families with children, she felt guilty when she eventually had to walk away from them. But somehow she sensed that a cop with a gun might even be of greater risk to these innocent people than not having her there at all. So she would get them inside and then move on. As dawn finally broke, Carla felt relieved. Perhaps with the light, the city would emerge from this crisis and would feel less like a low ring of Dante's Inferno. Exhausted, she pulled into a sandy neighborhood with a cul-de-sac and parked her cruiser. She put her head back, hoping to just close her eyes for a few minutes, and within seconds was deeply asleep. Even as she was drifting away, part of her screamed that this was a terrible idea. But as tired as she was, she couldn't stop the sleep once it crept up on her. She had no idea how much later it was when she was awakened by the sound of gunfire. She shook her head and tried to focus, looking out the windshield and trying to locate the source of the shots. But the neighborhood looked like every other street she had seen over the course of the night. Barricaded houses and dead bodies in the street. At the end of the cul-de-sac was a construction dumpster that had been dragged into the center of the roundabout, and she started up her cruiser and headed in that direction. At the end of the street, she saw a heavy-set young man on the porch of an upscale house, brandishing a deer rifle and still pointing it at 3 dead bodies scattered on his lawn. 3 faces peered out from the window behind the man, and as she pulled up, the terrified homeowner put his gun to his shoulder and drew a bead on her car. "Stay back!" he screamed. "Stay back, or I swear to God I'll shoot you too!" She instantly sensed that this man wasn't one of the infected or crazed or whatever they were. He was just a terrified young father trying to protect his home. She left her gun in the holster and eased out of the vehicle, staying behind the open door in case she needed to dive for cover. "It's all right. I'm not going to come any closer. I just want to help. Can you tell me what happened?" "You can help by getting the fuck out of here," the man yelled, his gun still shakily pointed at her. "Okay, I'll go, if you'll just go back into your home," she said. "You'll be safer inside." The man glanced at the sky. The sun had cleared the Wasatch and was now shining down upon the street. "It's dawn. The radio said the curfew is overnight. I have the right to be on my porch if I want to be. You're the trespasser." He gestured with the gun's barrel at the dead bodies. "They were the trespassers." "It's okay," Carla said, keeping her hands where the young man could see them. "Can you just tell me what happened?" The man's breath caught in his throat, and his eyes twitched, as if he was trying to decide whether to talk or shoot. Finally, he blinked heavily and gestured at one of the bodies. It was an older man dressed in overalls and a red baseball cap. "That guy came knocking at our door. He demanded we let him in. He said they needed help." A look of incredible pain washed over the man's face, but he quickly pushed it down. "But I'm not trusting anybody. I told him to go away, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't go." For the first time, Carla noticed that there was a bullet hole in the door behind the man. Had the man in overalls opened fire on the house? Or had the man on the porch shot him through the door and then came out to finish the job? She looked for other weapons but saw none. Had the other bodies on the lawn been the older man's family? It was hard to tell from the bloody corpses. "It's all right," Carla said, although she really understood nothing of what had really happened here. "I understand. You had to protect your family. But they're dead now. Why don't you just put down the gun and go back inside?" How about you tell me what the fuck is going on first? The man said, taking a more aggressive shooting stance and angling his face down to sight Carla through the scope. She felt her skin prickle as the man's finger inched toward the trigger. I wish I could, sir, but nobody knows what's going on. If I knew, I'd tell you. The TV said something about a virus. Is that it? I really don't know. But I do know we're all safer inside than we are outside. That's bullshit, he screamed. He gestured at the house next door. Gavin and Marcia and their kids were locked in their house just like we were. But then we heard them screaming. I was standing watch. Nobody broke in, but they started screaming anyway. I should have gone over to help, but I didn't. I have my own kids to worry about. I heard their kids screaming for about 10 minutes, then it went quiet. They're all dead in there, so we're not any safer in our houses than we are outside. Please, sir, please stay calm. I'll stay calm if you tell me right now what the fuck is going on. Either that or I swear to God I'll put a bullet in you and then get my family out of here in your squad car. I swear to God. Like I told you, I don't know. Well, somebody has to know, he screamed. And in that moment, perhaps accidentally, he squeezed off a shot. Carla saw the window on the driver's side door shatter before she heard the shot itself, and she was diving back into the car, even before the glass tinkled onto the gray pavement. She scrambled to get her gun out of the holster, but when she peeked over the dashboard, it was just in time to see the man slam the door. She breathed a heavy sigh, laying across both of the front seats. That's my cue, she thought. He's inside. There isn't any reason to stay here. She hunched low in the seat, put the car in gear, and slowly backed away down the cul-de-sac. Her car bumped over something that she hoped was just a bundle of rags, but she knew was not. And when she was a safe distance down the street, she jockeyed her car around. She could still see the house at the end of the street, silent now. The bodies on the grass were still visible, and she wondered briefly who they had been. Had the man in overalls really been a threat to that family? Or was he just someone looking for help? She suspected that nobody would ever know. The bodies will just have to stay on the lawn, she thought. They're certainly not the only ones, even on this street. At the cross street a block away, another squad car pulled up behind her, the light rotating slowly on the roof, but the sirens off. They must have been nearby and heard the shots. As she looked in the rearview mirror, she recognized the two faces. They were Daphne Smalls and Jack Doyle, two veteran officers on the Sandy force that she'd known for years. But now they were both out, with their guns trained on the back windshield of her car. I guess even cops in squad cars aren't above suspicion now. Slowly, she eased her door open and got out, her hands above the roof of the car. Holster your pieces, guys and gals, she said, trying to keep her voice light. You know me. It's Carla Grayson. Both of the cops dropped their guns in unison, but Carla also noticed that neither of them actually holstered the weapons. Carla, Daphne said. Jesus Christ, what are you doing in uniform? I thought you made detective years ago. Carla dropped her hands and walked back to join the pair. I don't think there are any detectives anymore, Daph. They're just cops. You're a bit out of your area, too, aren't you? Jack said. He was a big, dark-skinned man with a broad face and kind eyes. What are you doing in Sandy? To be honest, I'm a little lost. I've just been driving through the suburbs, trying to keep people in their houses. Now that it's light, it seems like everybody's losing their good sense. Yeah, we know, Daphne said. Lots of people are trying to get out now. I think we're going to see an exodus this morning. They think the fact that it's light somehow makes things safer, but there still isn't anywhere to go. Word is that the city's still quarantined, Jack said, and that until things start to calm the fuck down, nobody should leave their homes. Yeah, try telling that to the guy back there, Carla pointed over her shoulder. He shot some intruders on the lawn. He even threatened to shoot me and steal my squad car. He says he and his family are going to get out. Yeah, Him and about 500,000 other people, Daphne said. But they won't get far. At least, not out of the city. All the Army and National Guard guys have the roads blocked. I hear they're even patrolling the desert with jeeps and ATVs to keep everybody in the city. They say it's a virus, Jack said, finally putting his piece back in the holster. Carla, do you believe that? I don't know what to believe. I guess that's as good of a theory as any. I don't believe a word of it, Daphne spat. I think the Army and the government know a lot more than they're saying. I don't think it's a virus at all. My guess is that it's a terrorist attack, some kind of nerve gas. It's going to dissipate eventually and will be okay, but who knows how long that'll take? And if it's terrorists, Jax added, who knows what comes next? There might be sleeper cells. Carla saw the weariness on their faces and their disappointment that she had no more answers than they did. And although it was comforting to think that what was happening here could be chalked up to chemical weapons or terrorism, she didn't believe it. Cops were prone to conspiracy theories and to believing that every problem had a law enforcement solution, but she knew in her bones that this was something far less logical, something much less scientific, and more purely and essentially evil. So, how long do they expect us to stay out here? Daphne asked. As long as it takes, I guess, Carla said with a shrug. Yeah, well, fuck that. I have kids at home. Do you? Carla flinched. Daphne knew the answer to that question, and asking it felt cruel. No kids. And Eric's gone? Yes, years ago now. Well, you can stay out here and risk getting shot or stabbed or worse, but I've about had my fill of it. The woman looked agitated, and Jack shot Carla a look that said he'd been arguing about this with his partner for some hours. Daph, we need you to stay out here, Carla said. We're the only ones that can help. Don't give me any of that thin blue line bullshit, the woman said. I've heard enough of it from Jax. In case you haven't noticed, that blue line snapped around midnight. There's nothing else we can do out here except watch more people die. We can't prevent anything. Jax looked at Carla sadly. Daphne said she's going home. I told her I'd drive her. Carla wanted to talk the woman out of it, but how could she? Daphne was right. Carla didn't have kids at home or a husband. How much differently would she feel if she did? Would she be willing to stay out here in harm's way when she could be home protecting her own family? Something in Daphne's eyes almost begged Carla to tell her she had a duty to stay. And when she didn't, the woman finally said, Carla, I haven't been able to get a call through to my husband and daughter for 3 hours. I can't be out here dealing with other people killing each other when I don't know if my own family is safe. Weakly, Carla leaned against the fender of Daphne and Jax's squad car. But if we leave, there won't be anybody left. The Army's gone. It's just us now. Carla, wake up. Any illusion of control we had over what's going on is over. The phones are out, and the cell phones aren't going to be far behind. We were up in the foothills a few hours ago, and we could see that the whole city is without power now, except for a few spots up in the avenues. What happens when the cell towers go out, and when the radios stop working? You know they're going to. They're a mess of static and interference already. What happens when we can't even communicate with dispatch? Carla, everybody in this city is already on their own. I'm going to keep my own family safe. Jax had holstered his weapon, but Daphne's revolver was still in her hand as she spoke, and it was trembling. And although Carla wanted to say something, all she could feel was defeat. She looked at the pavement at her feet and saw a smear of blood there under her shoes. Her eyes followed it to a dead animal, a cat maybe, or a small dog, in the gutter and already covered with flies. Carla, we have to go, Jack said. I'm going to take Daphne home, and then I'll be back out. I'll stay on the street for as long as I need to. I'll go wherever they tell me to go. Carla was surprised that her eyes were moist as she looked up at the pair. Thank you, Jax. She turned to Daphne. Keep your family safe, Daph. And good luck. The pair were in their car and backing away when Jax leaned out for one last word. "I hope we see you on the other side of this, Carla," he said. "Whatever this is." "15 minutes later, Carla was still sitting in her car, staring at the empty street. Everything around her was so quiet now that when the phone rang in her pocket, she nearly jumped out of her skin. She dug the phone out, surprised that a call had gotten through, but there on the screen was the caller ID. Morgan Jensen, Carla thought, staring at the screen. Of all the people in the world, she might be the last one I expected to hear from. She punched the answer button. "Hello, Morgan?" "Carla, I've been trying to call for hours. Thank God you're there." "Hi, Morgan. It's good to hear your voice, but I'm surprised you're calling. Last I heard you were on the air, in the anchor chair." "I had been, but that's over. We lost power and we're off the air. But even before that, we'd lost contact with the federal government and even the disaster response center at the Capitol. I guess you've heard the city's under quarantine." "Yeah, I heard they think it's viral." "Well, I suspect that's bullshit. And that's why I'm calling. I noticed something really strange here, and I wanted to make sure the cops knew about it. You're the only one I could think of that might listen." "Okay, shoot," Carla said, leaning back in her seat. A block away, a man with a backpack, a machete, and a vicious-looking German shepherd crossed the street at a jog, but they didn't turn to look her way. "We had an attack here at the studio," Morgan was saying. "It was my cameraman, Stan Kirshner, and I noticed something odd. He started scratching at the back of his hand just before he went crazy. And then I started asking around, and a couple other people who had witnessed an attack said they saw the same thing. Just before somebody went crazy, they started scratching at their hands." "Well, that's interesting," Carla said, her eyes still trained on the man and his dog as they disappeared between two houses. "I think it's important, because it could be a kind of early warning sign," Morgan said. She was building up a head of steam, and she was speaking really fast, either because she feared the phone would go out or just from pure adrenaline. "If people see somebody scratching their hands, maybe they can get out of the way before they go nuts. But another reason I wanted to call you in particular is that I was thinking about that day last week when Howard Gunderson was being arraigned. Do you remember?" "Howard Gunderson?" It actually took Carla a moment to remember who Howard Gunderson was. She hadn't thought of the boy since this began, and with all the insanity happening all around her, the escaped murderer seemed the least of the city's problems. "Yes, Gunderson. Don't you remember? In that hearing, we both noticed it. Right before he went crazy and jumped over the tables, we both noticed that he was scratching. Carla, he was scratching his right hand. We talked about it the morning after he escaped." The scene flooded back to Carla. The reporter was right. She could picture it as clear as day now. Howard sitting at that table in the hearing room, scratching at his hand, and then seconds later he launched himself over the railing into the crowd of spectators. "Yeah, Morgan, I remember. That's interesting. But what does it mean?" "Well, I'm not sure. But if I'm right, then Howard Gunderson's murder of Richard Pratt may have been the first example of this madness. And if it's a virus like they're saying, maybe he's our patient zero." "My God," Carla sighed. "Getting through to the SLPD's been impossible, and there doesn't seem to be any way to get word to the state or federal authorities, but somebody has to know. If there's any kind of research going on to try to find a vaccine or a cure for this thing, maybe they need their patient zero. Gunderson might help them figure out when and how this thing got started." "Morgan, that's all really interesting, but it sounds like a real long shot." The reporter was still talking, as if she hadn't even heard what Carla said. "You need to convince your superiors that finding Howard Gunderson is important." I'll try, but I don't think they care about anything like that right now, not with the city on fire, and Carla, I have to go. I'm not sure I'll be able to call again. We don't have any way to charge our cell phones here, but I hope you get through this. I hope we all do. It's been great knowing you these past few years." Morgan's voice on the phone was already crackling and cutting out so that Carla was only getting one word out of every 5. "Gunderson, on the... maybe somebody... a thin hope... please..." And with that last word, the call cut out completely. Carla stared at her dead phone. Putting it down, she tried to call dispatch on her radio, but it was now such a mass of static and noise that she could barely hear any voices, and nobody was ready to respond to her call. She quickly gave up. "I can tell them what Morgan told me, but will they even care? Will they think it's important? Or will they say that finding an escaped prisoner is the least of our problems right now?" On a whim, she tried her phone, dialing the dispatch backup cell number. To her surprise, on the 5th dial, the call went through. "Dispatch," the woman on the end of the line answered. "Gina," Carla shouted, "can you hear me?" "Who is this?" the woman at the end of the line asked, barely audible over the noise of the dispatch office behind her. "Gina, it's Carla Grayson. Thank God I have the backup cell number. The radios all seem to be going out." "Yeah, they're coming and going, but mostly going now. Are you okay out there, Carla?" "Yeah, I'm fine, at least for now. But I have an important question. Has anybody found Howard Gunderson yet?" "Who?" the dispatch asked. "Gunderson. Howard Gunderson. He escaped Sunday morning." The dispatcher barked out a tense laugh. "Gunderson? No, and I don't think anybody's even trying. Do you know that every prisoner at Point of the Mountain is out?" "No, I didn't hear that," Carla said, noting her inability to find anything shocking anymore. "Yeah, some guard shot up the place and opened all the cells. The whole place is empty. And we haven't even sent anybody down there to check it out, so if nobody's worried about that, I doubt they're worried about Howard Gunderson. Escaped prisoners aren't high on our list of priorities right now." "I understand. Hey, Carla, if you don't need anything, I have to go." "Wait, Gina, just one more quick question. Have you heard anything about people scratching their hands before they go berserk?" Carla asked. The dispatcher answered without even a pause. "Yeah, absolutely. I probably heard that 6 or 8 times tonight, and they said it on the news earlier before they went out when the power went down. Why?" Before she could answer the dispatcher, there was an explosion somewhere in the distance. She turned her attention back to the phone. "Gina, tell everyone we have to find Howard Gunderson. Tell the governor's office, if there's still anybody up there. It's got to be a priority. Gunderson may be the key to this." She realized too late that her connection must have gone down with the explosion. There was nothing in her ear now but the silence of a dropped call. I doubt Gina would have done anything with that information, even if she'd heard it, Carla thought. I sound crazy, even to myself. But she couldn't stop thinking about the escaped prisoners at Point of the Mountain. How did they get out? How did Howard get out? Was there a link between the two? And what if Howard really was the key to this whole thing? She kept hearing Howard's mother telling her that Howard was convinced he was being taken over by some being. What did she say that he called it? A demon? She tried the radio one more time, but now it was only static. With a sigh, she put down the handset and looked out at the dead traffic light at the end of the street. I have to find Howard. Daphne was right. I'm not doing any good out here. Her first challenge would be to get across the city. She started her engine and headed north. You're listening to The Last Handful of Clover, a novel by Wess Mongo Jolley. If you're enjoying this audiobook, please consider supporting the author on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Wess Mongo Jolley. And for more information, check out the author's website at wessmongojolley.com. That's WESSMONGOJOLLEY.com. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more episodes.